Good evening, campers, streamers, and babysitters, and welcome back to another Raw Reaction review. This time we are talking about Brute 1976. In 1976, a group of people in the desert for a photo shoot stumble upon an abandoned town called Savage. But they are not alone. A family of masked psychopaths have claimed Savage as their own and are hell bent on leaving it up to its name. Luke, I would not fault anybody who seeks this movie out, or at least even just sees the poster, for saying, "Ooh, I'm getting some I guess you'd call them Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes," because yes, this is very much a late 70s, early 80s kind of inspired slasher flick, I guess we could call it, with a little bit of that modern over-the-top extreme gore that we're kind of used to seeing nowadays. So it's a little bit of a hodgepodge. We've seen a lot of movies like this over the years that kind of, go back to that classic feel, but try to inject some modern stuff into it. And, I was actually pretty excited for this. We'd heard about it a long time ago. One of our buddies, Chuck, the movie guy, was talking about it. He got to see a real early cut of it, and he thought it was quite a lot of fun. So I was curious to see if this one was going to hit with us. And now that we've seen the movie, take it away. Let us know about Brute 1976.
Well. I was excited about this one as well. When you had sent it over to me and we got the screener for it, I had looked it up, and yeah, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes are very strong. The aesthetic is there. You can tell heavily inspired. And last time I had thought to myself about a Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired work, I would probably go back to Ty West's X. Everyone talks about that one being very heavily influenced about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I think that one works in all the best ways. So I was hoping to get something of that, something like that from Brute 1976. I wouldn't say we didn't kick it into full gear for what I had expected or wanted out of a film like this. I think we kind of teeter on that, very heavily influenced Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you can't help but draw those parallels because we don't do enough of intriguing or things that they would do, creative things that they would do on their own. It seems very inspired by. So this kind of left me wanting more just out of the concept.
Yeah, and for every positive and every really, I'd say, strong moment this movie has, I do have a couple of gripes. One of those things is yeah, it's not only Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to be fair. This does have a lot of, I guess you'd call it, relation or DNA shared with things like The Hills Have Eyes, especially the Wes Craven original, but again with that kind of remake blood, in a sense, where it's like they just go for it with a lot of really gory kills and some really, I would say, unexpectedly brutal and over-the-top sequences. One involving a good old glory hole. So lots of good stuff there, lots of fun stuff there. But at the end of the day, I think where this film is probably going to fall flat for most people, and I think really left me pretty deeply unsatisfied, it's got to be this family. This family of killers. I'm all for it. Texas Chainsaw Massacre sets the stage for one of the best on-screen, brutal serial killer families that we've got. Obviously, the Firefly clan can go in there, and then of course we have the folks from The Hills Have Eyes, and it's kind of like you get a nice mix of everybody. I just feel like none of these characters stood out to me. Everybody felt so samey when it comes to just what they're trying to interpret. There's one character who I would say design-wise is fantastic. But then there's other characters where it's like you have your Leatherface sort of knockoff character, and I'm sorry, it's just like what he looks goofy and weird, and sometimes he looks really clean, other times he looks really dirty. It's just like you could tell. I think they had a lot of visual aspirations and creativity there, but they didn't put enough into making them, have personalities or really stand out amongst each other.
I would agree with that as well. It seems like each different character, especially part of that family, the Savage family, or whatever you want to call them, they really get lost in the shuffle. And you look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I know we'll probably bring it up a handful of times just because the parallel is so strong and the influence is there, where you don't dive too deeply into those characters either, but Tobe Hooper gives enough of of what we get from those characters is start having you ask questions. You know, there are so many videos on Leatherface and what he's going through and how he views things. And for Brute 1976, we didn't really get any of that character work. And I didn't really feel any sort of connection where one character stands out from the other. Now, there is a spot in here where a character does take off their mask and there is this shared dialogue. And I think they were trying to give that character some sort of connective tissue, maybe some subvert some expectation of what
Yeah.
we were going to get. And it just didn't feel authentic. I could feel it felt like they were trying. Again, I could tell that they wanted to subvert the expectation, and it just didn't feel real. It really actually took me more so out of the scenario that we were in because it felt so awkward. So I think they did try to establish some sort of connective tissue with these characters, but it just didn't work with what they had given us in the scenarios that they put the characters in. And then there's this odd kind of dynamic between a couple of that one character and another one as a result of something else that happened. I apologize, I'm being so vague. We're not diving into spoilers here. But the scenario between this other character was very awkward and, you know, it was very comical to a certain extent. And again, it took me out of it. It just didn't really tonally. This film combats with itself, I think, where I just wanted this kind of nasty, gritty, gory, over the top feeling film. And we get some of that. But again, it never fully kicks into that gear. And then it has these other moments like subverting our expectation with another character that really combats the element that I want to be in. And it kind of takes me back to zero to try to get my groove back with this film.
Yeah, and that's the really, I think the worst part of it is because it's like, yeah, I like the setup. I like the ideas here. Again, we're not breaking any molds. We're not doing anything that's hasn't been seen before. But, you know, they really land with that. They really land with giving us a reason for these people to be out here and what they're doing. And then they also really land with the gore and some of the violence and some of the, like, you know, just horror, like gross out scenes that you get with that. But it's just, again, without that element of just making the family feel a bit more unique, and not just so it really feels like they had all this stuff set up and it just feels like they were maybe crunched for time when they were making this movie, or they've cut so much of it out that it just feels like some of characters are just getting sidelined, and then the ones we do get a little bit of intrigue in, it's just not really all that fleshed out. And I know you had actually brought to my attention that this movie already has a sequel in production and post production. I'm going to double check here, but I don't necessarily know if that's how this was sold. It wasn't sold that way to me, but sold to audiences of saying like, oh, we'll get more of them in the next one. But I have a hard time really finding myself all that excited to revisit this, especially since, you know, there's not really that standout memorable slasher character.
Yeah, I didn't know going into it that there was going to be a sequel. Some research after I had watched the film that there is going to be a sequel coming out. I think Brute 1986, if I remember correctly. But prior to even understanding that there was going to be a sequel and we are going to expand on this lore, it really did feel like they were withholding a lot of the stuff with the characters. Where it's like, oh, missed opportunity here and missed opportunity there, and you know they could be holding that off to get deeper stories in 1986, but unfortunately that doesn't help 1976, where we're left us wanting more, and not in a good way, where it's like it just felt unfulfilled to a certain extent. And when we look at this film, you're going to see, if you look into it before you actually turn this one on, you're going to see a lot of imagery. You know, we have guys in masks, we have a lot of blood, things like that, and there are a few kills in here where they really do deliver on that gore. And it was actually exciting to be like, oh man, I hope we can kind of sustain this. And like I said, there are a couple in here, but there isn't enough to warrant the runtime. This is over an hour and a half, I think. But
Mhm.
I was hoping for more of those memorable kills to be like, oh man, you remember this one? I was hoping after the credits rolled, I was going to be battling with myself to say which kill did I like the most. And I don't think we had enough of that. And even our character designs, where a lot of these guys were wearing masks, it almost, I wish they would have done something where they felt more homemade. It really does feel like they're kind of costume shoppy to a certain degree. And I know this is a lower budgeted film, but I wish they would have just went with something they would have homemade then, because it would have felt a little more authentic. And same with the clothing that a lot of characters are wearing, they seem very new and very fresh. And I was like, I wanted that kind of griminess, that dirtiness, that lived in feel, which we don't really get.
You know what I always like to talk about when I'm talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or comparing something to it? I love to talk about how goddamn sweaty everybody is in that movie and just how everybody feels stinky and gross. This does not feel that way. It does feel like everybody's kind of keeping it together. Even like Luke just said, our killers, they'll go from one scene of having a ton of blood on them to then looking clean in another. And it's like, I know it's a small budgeted movie, but it's just one of those things where it's, to me, I would have just caked on a bunch of dirt and blood from the beginning and just made it look like they've been busy and at work and doing stuff. There are certain scenes where things do feel grimy and gross. And then there are certain scenes where it does, again, just feel very polished and clean. And it's one of those things where it's like, if this wasn't the kind of movie it was, I'd be complimenting that by the fact that it looks very professional. It looks really well done for an independent movie, but it's just not the textures and the things that really keep me engaged when it comes to these characters. It does feel like a little bit, I would say a little bit like a movie that certain movie characters would be watching in some scenes. And that's unfortunate because, again, I think there's a strong idea here. It revisits some old territory that we're, very familiar with. I think that there's definitely a visual style and an eye from Marcel Walls here. And I think that overall the cast, the characters, they're not terrible. They're pretty relatable and pretty fun. They don't seem to be taking each other very seriously, which is great. They do have some chemistry. And, I just think overall it's just kind of like you have all these pieces here. You just didn't quite get them connected. Now, do I think you should seek out this movie? I think if you like slashers and you want just a handful of interesting, kind of fun kills that get a little bit brutal, but you're not looking for something that's going to wow you, knock your socks off, add to the Blu-ray collection, I'd say Brute 1976 is probably going to fill that for you. It's a good Tubi watch. It's a good streaming watch. So I'm going to go with worth a watch on this one. Maybe after just seeing it, I would have been a little harsher on it. Maybe went closer to proceed with caution. But because we watched this a couple weeks ago and there was a delay with the reviews with from the studio. So it's just one of those things where now that I've had time to sit with it, really reflect on it, I think that's where I want to sit with this.
Yeah, and I had an expectation for this film. I don't think it necessarily hit what I wanted it to. It still left me wanting to see more in terms of I wish they could have done this or they could have done that. But there's a clear eye here in terms of filmmaking, and I think a lot of the gripes that I do have were probably because of how small the budget was, and to be able to get something out that is of quality that does feel professional is a huge gold star, a feather in the cap. So it's like, I can't beat up on this film too bad. It's not everything that I wanted it to be. I am intrigued by the sequel. I want to see if it gets gorier, if we get deeper into the characters, because it kind of gets hard to review something like this as a standalone when we know there's going to be a sequel for it, and it's like a kind of were they setting the table here so they can deliver in 1986? So that remains to be seen. 1976 did leave me a little unfulfilled, but clearly there's an interesting story here. It's not breaking any barriers, any molds, anything like that, but it knows what it is. It tries to deliver on that aspect as best as it can. It just didn't hit every point for me. So I think there are some fun characters in here. There are some fun instances. Some of the comedy works. A lot of it doesn't for me, unfortunately, but there's some good kills as well. So I'm going to go worth a watch on this one. If it intrigues you by just looking at some of the pictures, the synopsis in general, I think you're going to find some fun with it. It might not scratch every itch that you want, but I think Brute 1976 is certainly worth your time to turn this one on and at least give it a passive watch.
Agreed. Yes, guys. Well, that's going to wrap us up here for our review of Brute 1976. Let us know down below if you heard about this one, if you're looking forward to it. Are you still going to go check it out? And if you're just coming back from watching it, let us know down below. Are we way off base on this one? Did we miss the mark? Are we being too pretentious, snooty horror critics or fans? Or are we right on the money for you as well? Again, just like Luke said, I'm still eager to check out 1986, and I'm still eager to see what the team behind this will do next, because I think there is some promise there. I just think that again, just got to find a way to connect those pieces a little better. So that's going to leave it up here for us, guys. So until next time, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.
Do the horse shit, gonna do it live. Put Splattercast, kick it. Every day they live. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna smash your ass.